Little Fishy, written by Tony Amago, illustrated by Nuria Rodriguez, and music by Inaki Rubio. Ready to get really cold? This is where the Antarctic tale begins. Many people believe that all that exists at the South Pole at the end of the world is water, ice, and deserted beaches. This place is known as the Antarctic, and it is so cold that nobody lives there. Not even in the summer. Well, not exactly nobody. Let me introduce you to Mr. Penn. Mr. Penn is a penguin. That's right. Mr. Penn is a penguin who lives on a beach way down south, where it's really cold. Mr. Penn can swim, dance, and walks very slowly, but he can't fly. Mr. Penn likes shrimp and fish. This is Mrs. Ale. Mrs. Ale is a ale. Exactly. She also lives way down south, where the sea is covered in ice. Mrs. Whale can leap out of the water and dive to the bottom of the sea, but she can't fly either. Mrs. Ale likes shrimps and fish too. As all good neighbors do, Mr. Penn and Mrs. Ale get along very well and say good morning to each other when they meet up. But today, something has happened on the beach. A little fish turned up on the shore this morning. Neither on the sand nor in the water, but right in the middle. Mr. Penn spotted it from afar and thought, breakfast. He approached the little fish, and just as he was about to gobble it down, he heard a deep, loud voice behind him. Hum, good morning. Mrs. Ale was standing behind him on the shore, right where the waves break. The enormous whale was eyeing the little fish greedily. Excuse me for interrupting, Mr. Penn, but I saw that fish first, and I intend to have it for breakfast. Mr. Penn glanced down at the little fish at his feet and replied to the whale, I don't want to have an argument, Mrs. Ale, but I got here first, and I also intend to have it for breakfast. And besides, if you eat it, you'll still be hungry afterwards. You should know that whales eat a load of fish in a single mouthful, and their stomach is bigger than a car. Mrs. Ale then replied to the penguin, I might still be hungry afterwards, Mr. Penn, but if you eat it, you might choke. As you may have guessed, penguins eat fish one by one, and only if they are small enough to swallow. Mr. Penn, set on devouring the little fish, kept on insisting. Well, you should know that if a bone gets stuck on your tongue, it will hurt a lot, and you'll have to go to the hospital to be treated by the crab surgeons. The crab surgeons are entrusted with healing the wounds of the inhabitants of the sea. But Mrs. Ale had decided she wasn't going to share the little fish and attempted to discourage the penguin. Look, Mr. Penn, that little fish doesn't appear very fresh and doesn't smell too good either. What will happen if you eat it and get food poisoning? You'll end up spending a week in bed with a fever and stomachache. Mr. Penn and Mrs. Ale stared at each other, challenging each other like cowboys in a western. Neither of them was willing to give up their breakfast. Right then, Mrs. Gull swept down from the sky. Yes, you guessed it. Mrs. Gull is a seagull. She likes to spend her day chatting with her friends and collecting seashells. Mrs. Gull is a magnificent flyer, but her manners leave a lot to be desired. Realizing the whale and the penguin were having trouble agreeing, Mrs. Gull grabbed the little fish and departed without so much as a squawk. Mr. Penn and Mrs. Ale watched the seagull fly off into the sky with the little fish in its beak. Both Mrs. Ale and Mr. Penn were left looking silly. Their breakfast had been carried off into the distance because they were incapable of coming to an agreement. They didn't even get to taste a morsel of the delicious little fish. They just said, "Have a good day," and went their separate ways, pondering on the fact that a little is always better than nothing, and that sharing is well worth it. All right, friends. Thank you for being a part of Dave's Story Time. If you wish to help me continue to share storybooks and allow children to see how much fun reading is, you can do so by subscribing, sharing, and liking. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll know each time I add a new video. Oh, and remember to also visit your local library so you can find awesome books just like this one. Until next time, bye.